welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany and happy Victober. During the summer, I did weekly reading vlogs to kind of track my reading, but during September, I read a lot of longer books, and as a result, I didn't feel like I could actually accurately give you like a week to week, like it wasn't going to be enough information, it felt like, on each book because I was reading so many larger books. So I decided to forego weekly vlogs during the month of September. I do have one reading vlog that I posted for my channel for Name of the Rose, and then I have one that I did for my Patreon for Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, but other than that, I didn't do any vlogging. And so during the month of October, I have a lot of really small books that I'm looking to get to, and so I'm really excited to be doing weekly vlogs again. So let's talk about what I am reading this week. So my big chunk that I'm actually doing throughout the entire month is Nickleby by Charles Dickens. Super excited to be reading this with my dear friend Dia from Novel Idea and Sweet Kelly from Kelly Reads a Lot. The three of us are reading this together. We're reading it at the pace of 2 chapters a day, so it will last us pretty much the entire month. Actually, definitely the entire month. So I'm really looking forward to reading this. It's the first Dickens I've read this year, which is shocking. Usually I've already read one by now, and then reading my second one in October has kind of been how I have scheduled my Dickens reads the past couple of years. This is a new to me Dickens and really enjoying it so far. I'm only like 2 chapters in, but it's about a young man who his father died in debt and his uncle is super wealthy, but his uncle's not the nicest person. So we're just kind of following that drama so far. Not really sure what turn the story's gonna take from here, but I just love Dickens writing and it's so nice to be back in it. Just the first sentence of this is so good. Actually, it's not the first sentence, it's in the first paragraph, and it says, "Thus 2 people who cannot afford to play cards for money sometimes sit down to a quiet game for love." Talking about people who are poor getting married despite the fact that it doesn't advance the other one socially or financially in any way. They're actually marrying for love, and I just loved that. I'm also reading 3 Men in a Boat by Jerome K. Jerome. Totally different vibes in terms of Victorian literature. This one I will finish this week, I'm sure. It's itty bitty and it's very funny. I've only read the first chapter so far, but it's very, very humorous. The guy who is the narrator is very much a hypochondriac, and it's just really funny the way that he's talking about how you see things and you read a pamphlet and you're like, oh my gosh, I have all those symptoms, I think I have this disease. And it's just so funny because it just reminds me of like when you Google something and WebMD's results are always going to say you have cancer. Like it always goes to the most extreme and you're like, oh my gosh, I have every symptom for this like fatal disease, but I felt fine until I realized that, you know, things like that. I've been reading a lot of big, heavy, darker books lately, so this is a really nice change. I'm reading this with Rainy from Rainy Day Reads, and then also Dia, so I'm reading 2 books with Dia at once. I have a couple non-Victober reads that I am currently working on, one of which is The Star That Always Stays by, who is this by? Anna Rose Johnson. And this is one that I'm doing a Patreon weekend reading challenge, and this is one that I was like, oh, I'm gonna finish this on Saturday, so Sunday, Victober starts. I will be ready to dive into all the Victorian books, but I had finished Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, so I needed something else. I did not finish this, so I'm part of the way through this one. It's about a young girl who in the, I guess it's probably right before World War I or World War II, I'm not actually sure which one, but right before then, her parents get divorced. She lives in Michigan, and her mother ends up getting remarried like very quickly, like she meets someone and within a month they're like getting married. And so she's obviously pretty nervous about that, and she is like part French, part, I can't remember what her dad is, like Polish or Swedish or something like that, and then part Native American as well, and her mother asks her to keep her Native American heritage hidden from her new stepfather, so that way that doesn't end up being an issue. And so there's a lot of things that this is dealing with so far. Topics of race, topics of being the child of a divorced parent who is then remarried, and the judgment that comes along with that at this time in history. And there's a lot of bookish stuff that I really like about it, a lot, but it was compared to like a modern day Anne of Green Gables, and that it most certainly is not, at least so far, but I'll keep you updated on that. And then I also have a little novella that I'm reading from this Arcanum Unbounded collection with my friend Whitney Drew. I'm reading 6 of the Dusk. and that is a novella that is recommended to read in between Oathbringer and Rhythm of War. So we just finished Oathbringer last month. Well, actually Whitney I think finished it sometime in August, but I finished it like mid-September, so it just took me longer to read it. So this goes in between that, and so I haven't started that, but that's something that I need to get through. It's pretty short, so we're gonna be reading this one, and then we'll be reading Dawn Shard just a little bit later. So those are my reading plans for this week. I anticipate finishing The Star That Always Stays and Six of the Dusk relatively soon, so I may add something else in there to kind of like fill out my reading, or I may just keep reading Nicholas Nickleby and 3 Men in a Boat. Not really sure, but I'll be back with an update soon. It is now Friday. It's the end of the week. So I did finish a few things, but I didn't finish a ton. So I'll tell you what I finished first. So I did finish The Star That Always Stays, and I found myself being a little bit let down by this book because it was compared to Anne of Green Gables and things like that. And I really don't think it's anything like Anne of Green Gables at all, quite honestly. I also didn't feel like the race element was explored quite as much as the fact that her mother was divorced. I feel like that was a much more taboo thing that was explored more than the fact that she was part Native American. We do get into that, but I thought it was going to be a much more prominent thing in the book, and it really wasn't, which is fine. I still really liked that and felt like all of that was handled pretty well. The thing that I really didn't like as much about it is I didn't realize that this is a Christian book. Not that that is a bad thing. It's not at all. I just feel like the way that it was written, I feel like the Christian elements came out of the blue and felt like it slaps you in the face all of the sudden, where she's struggling with things, and then, you know, people in her life, her new stepdad and her new stepbrother are sharing scripture verses with her, and all of a sudden, you know, she's got this warm feeling and she's like, oh, everything's gonna be okay, God cares about me. But she wasn't someone where it seemed like faith was a huge part of her life up to that point. Like, they were Catholic and her new stepfamily is Protestant. But other than her talking about going to mass and now church services are different and those kind of things, other than that, she doesn't really talk about her faith at all or anything like that. And so it just seemed like really out of the blue. And I think that it would have been something where she was struggling with her faith, or, you know, felt like God wasn't there or something, and then had other people come through and talk to her about that. I think that that would have been more meaningful. It would have made more sense. It would have felt less like just totally out of the blue. And so I wish that it had had more towards the beginning to work towards that ending, and then I think it would have been more meaningful for me. But I mean, it was fine. It wasn't a bad book. It's probably like 3-ish star for me, where I feel like it was enjoyable, felt like it was interesting at times, just felt like certain elements seemed like they were really heavy at the end and not really present throughout the rest of the story. I also finished Six of the Dusk, and I read that in like one sitting, I think, or 2 sittings. It's really, really short. I'm really confused as to why this is recommended to read in between Oathbringer and Rhythm of War, because I feel like it doesn't fit there. Well, I haven't read Rhythm of War, so maybe this planet and some of the things that are happening here are going to come into play with Rhythm of War, but it feels like so entirely unrelated, and it feels like a sci-fi novella about like conservationism. So it feels like it's fine. Like, it was good. I think it was well done in general, but it just feels like I don't know how this fits in the Cosmere or with the Stormlight Archive. Last up, my Victorian reads. So I did not finish 3 Men in a Boat yet, but I am over halfway through. I'm on page 120. out of 180. So I guess I'm like 2/3 of the way through. It's windy all of a sudden. I don't know what's happening with that. Anyway, I am really liking it a lot. It's very funny. It feels very like side tangenty, which is fine. So there's these guys who are friends and they decide they want to go on this trip on the river and they're going to bring a dog with them. And it's really funny because all of us were talking and Dia and I said that we didn't know that Montmorency was the dog. We thought it was just like another one of the guys until something talks about him like growling or barking and then you're like, oh, that's a dog. Anyway, so it's really funny. They decide they're going to go on this trip and basically everything that happens reminds the narrator of something else that happened. And so he's got stories to tell and there's just a lot of side tangents. Dia compared it to Monty Python and I think that really feels very fitting in the way that it's just very episodic in a way and also like, oh, then here's this and we go into this backstory of something that feels like almost unrelated, but it's really, really funny. Like there's a chapter where they're talking about packing certain foods and they're like, well, we're not going to bring cheese, which causes the narrator to go on this big story about one time where he brought cheese back for someone and it smelled so bad that like the guy's wife was like, I'm not staying in this house if the cheese is going to be here. And it was so funny. I think my favorite story has actually been where he's talking about packing and he's like, I want to be in charge of packing. And so that means that he like is getting all the stuff together. And he's like, no, that's not what I meant. I want to be in charge like when you're the one telling everyone else what to do. And then he goes on this story about some guy he knows, I think it was like his uncle or something, where he was like, I'm gonna hang up a picture frame today, and he's like, you go get the hammer and you go get this and you go do this, and he's got everyone running everywhere and doing all this stuff, and it's just like so funny. And then at the end it talks about how like now there are grooves in the wall and the picture is crooked and it looks terrible, and the guy's like, can you believe that people pay people to do this? It's just so funny. So I'm really enjoying this. There's a couple sections that have dragged a bit for me where the story that's going with it just, it's not jiving with my sense of humor, but it's so different than anything else I've read for a really long time. I haven't read anything that is intentionally the purpose is to be humorous, and I don't even know how long. I've been reading a lot of longer, darker, more challenging works, and so this is a really fun reprieve. Then I have started Nickleby, and as you will see, I have made a sizable chunk. I am 150-ish pages in and just loving it so much. I just feel like Dickens' writing is like coming home for me. Like I just love him. I have been reading him for most of my life, for decades, and I just love when I pick up his works. Like his voice is so distinctive to me, and I just love the way that he writes. And so far this book might be one that I might recommend as a longer Dickens to start with, because it doesn't feel as convoluted as some of his do. Like I'm thinking of like Our Mutual Friend, where there's like a bajillion characters and you're just like, oh my gosh. And this doesn't feel that way. You have a smaller cast of characters that you're introduced to. And so it's about this young man, Nicholas Nickleby. I think I already mentioned his father has passed away, leaving him and his sister and his mother destitute. So he is going away and he's working at this school. And yeah, so we're just following his progress. Well, then we're looking back to his mother and his sister in London and what's going on with them and how the uncle is taking care of them or not taking care of them. And I'm just really liking it. It's just so wonderful to read. There's been one section I didn't really like, and that's a section where they're traveling and they're the people who are together, they're just like, oh my gosh, we're like really bored and they're stranded somewhere, so they decide they're gonna start telling stories. And the two stories that they tell just feel like super out of place, and there was some wisdom and morals in them that were interesting, but overall it just like felt like it didn't need to be there. And then there's like a footnote, and I looked to the back to the footnote and it talked about how he wrote a friend on that day that he wrote this and was like, I don't know how I'm gonna fill this space. And so he made up these stories and these travelers telling stories, so he didn't have to like fill the pages with more plot that he wasn't ready to put in there yet. I was like, oh, well, they definitely feel like they don't need to be there, and I guess they kind of didn't. So I just thought that that was kind of funny. But other than that, absolutely just adoring this so far. So my Victober so far is off to a really good start. I'm really enjoying the things that I'm reading. I was kind of hoping to be done or almost done with 3 Men in a Boat, but not quite yet, and that's okay. You know, it's fine. Some weeks are harder weeks to read as much as I would like to read, and this was one of those weeks, and I'm okay with that. But Really enjoying them both. I would love to hear from you in the comments below. What have you been reading this week? And if you've read any of the books that I either finished or I'm working on, I would love to hear your thoughts on that as well. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me. And I will see you again next time.